Hey everybody, I just got done watching the Idaho Student Murders, the new Peacock special that came out July 3rd. I'm watching it on July 4th. You'll probably watch it on July 5th, more than likely. And I just wanted to give you my thoughts about it. It is getting excruciatingly hard to watch all the documentaries, read the books that come along with Idaho 4 now that we know the case is over in a lot of ways. Now, by over, I mean now that Bryan Kohberger has entered a plea of guilty, and for most people in America, that is it. It is over. Why we're watching more documentaries, why we're reading more books, what does it really matter? The only way it's going to matter, of course, is if something changes and we find out more of the reasons why. This episode is another one of those episodes. It's not going to tell you anything new. It makes me aggravated watching it because, again, I have 90% of that episode. And for you, I would say most of you will be the same way. 90% of this episode is going to be nothing you haven't heard already. And in fact, it's got lies in it, in my opinion, things that we absolutely know are untrue. But you almost can't blame the documentarians because the PCA, for example, will say that that they noted that Bryan Kohberger's or that the vehicle, the white Elantra around the house, didn't have a front license plate. We know that's not true. It was written into the PCA, and all of these documentaries read the PCA, and they put it into their documentaries over and over and over again, even though we know on the stand that it was admitted that they did not know that the license plate didn't exist until after they were given Bryan Kohberger's name, until after they realized Bryan Kohberger didn't have a front license plate, and then they wrote it in to the PCA after the fact that it was observed without a license plate. And yet this gets repeated again. And this is one of the key takeaways from this video for all of you out there. Now that this is over, in the sense that the guilty plea has been submitted, these narratives are going to continue to be retold over and over again, and it will become official lore. This story will now always be known by people. Well, yeah, they already had him dead to rights. They noted that the car didn't have a license plate on the front of it, and that'll be repeated over and over again. And there's no reason of arguing with it. You can't. The case is over in a lot of ways. And so this is the most aggravating thing for those of you who have maintained the possibility that Bryan Kohberger didn't do this, is you will now have to suffer the fact that the official narrative and lore of this case will forever go down, including lies that are just simply not true, but it'll be repeated over and over and over again. And the public consciousness, even some of you, I guarantee you, even some of you are going to, a year from now, forget that that was a question and that wasn't actually true, and go, well, you know, they did have that vehicle without the license plate, and it's going to become part of your memory as well. And that's just part of the reality of how these things work. The lore going forward is going to repeat this story over and over again until it becomes the fact of the matter that we should have always known from all along. Now, let me try to get to you the key points of the takeaway. This particular episode, by the way, didn't offer much new. The only thing I would say that it offered new, if you are interested in hearing about that, is that it made a better argument, if you will, for the psychological profile of Bryan Kohberger, indicating that, again, going back from when he was 15 years old, things that he wrote about himself, being basically feeling like he had no emotions, he had no feelings, he didn't fit in, he felt like a sack of meat, all those kind of things. When laid out the way that it is, it makes you think, I get it now. This person just didn't have any feelings, didn't have any empathy. And so in that regard, if you are a person who is looking for answers about why Bryan Kohberger did this thing, if he did, and again, how do you argue he didn't if he's pled guilty in a court of law? And again, I've got videos explaining while it's even possible that even pleading guilty doesn't mean he's guilty. But there are other things that are coming out that are making me question a little bit about that. I'm going to save that for another video because, again, let's just focus on this documentary. So the big takeaway, again, for new information for you is just maybe a deeper dive into the psychological makeup. Another key takeaway, if you want to know, is that they didn't offer any motive really other than the psychological profile that maybe he was broken in his head kind of thing. And again, at the end of the day, you're left with nothing really new and concrete. I wouldn't say that there was any takeaways that you can take away from this that really helps you understand anything. So it's a waste of your time in that regard. Again, if you already believe that Bryan Kohberger is guilty, it's still a waste of your time because at the end of the day, it's just going to make you believe that Bryan Kohberger is guilty, which you already believed going in. At the end of the episode, it did end with the after the documentary, it clearly was a footnote that was added because the thing had been shot long before. It was added at the end. By the way, Bryan Kohberger has pled guilty to all these charges. It was as if the footnote of everything we just told you, telling you how Bryan Kohberger is the killer, obviously is true because Bryan Kohberger admitted guilt to all of these things. And so therefore, everything we said in this episode is true. That's aggravating as well. If you've been watching this case and you're like, but wait a minute, that doesn't answer this, that doesn't answer that, that doesn't answer the 911 call, it doesn't answer Dylan. And you're right, none of that gets answered. None of it will ever get answered. And it will end with and by the way, everything that we just said, the narrative that we just spun is true because Bryan Kohberger admitted guilt. And that's how it's going to end. And again, that's going to be part of the narrative going forward. So I don't know what else really to give to you. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about something that you're probably tired of hearing about. So we'll just leave it at that. I'm trying to look through my notes to see if there's anything that I really felt like there's really nothing. I can't think of anything other than they added some more details of women that felt uncomfortable about Bryan Kohberger, going to a brewery at DeSales University, for example, and apparently going to the brewery and hitting on women at the bar or acting awkwardly so they didn't feel comfortable with them. The story is over and over again an incel who can't have pretty women and therefore must kill because he can't have them. That was spun again in this case. Now, I will tell you that one thing that they did have a couple of defense attorneys come on who indicated that this information is circumstantial, that there's holes in the prosecution's case. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. He's already pled guilty, so it doesn't matter how many fucking holes there are in this case. It's done. So it doesn't matter. But they did have a couple of defense. And by the way, Howard Bloom, this is an example. One of the key takeaways that I thought was most disturbing in the case. Howard Bloom was all through this video again, promoting his book, When the Night Comes Falling, talking and talking and talking. And it's funny how for example, in the narrative, Howard Bloom talks about how Maddie and Kaylee went to the Corner Club bar that night around 10 and then left at 1:30 in the morning. That's it. Howard Bloom has an entire chapter to his book about Kaylee going to that bar, why she picked the bar, Jack being there, her shitting all over Jack, the tense moment that they had between the two of them, Maddie talking to Adam, his best friend at the bar all night long, being followed by Jack Showalter out, him saying that they're going to get you for this. All of that shit completely ignored in this documentary, and 2 sentences. They went to the bar at 10 o'clock-ish, and they left at 1:30. That was how the Corner Club was covered in this video. Perfect example of how this is the new narrative. Everything that could speculate that there really is something else that happened that night, covered by, they went to the bar and they left the bar. End of story. Even though, again, Howard Bloom, who's all through this fucking episode, had a whole chapter about what happened at the Corner Club, which shed reasonable doubt into those minds. They did show Jack Showalter creepily following the girls after they left. That was just, that was added with the punctuation. They looked into him and he was cleared quickly. Into that story. Some people thought it was strange. They show Jack Showalter following the girls. This looks strange, but police ruled him out very quickly. End of that story. So this is the way the narrative is going to go. He's guilty. He pled guilty. Everyone else was cleared. There is nobody else involved. At the end of the day, I feel like there are a lot of questions about why Kohberger picked that house. One could make the argument that it was random, that Bryan literally just picked a random house to hit, and therefore it won't make sense to anybody. It was just a random choice that night. Maybe that's true, and maybe that's the answer, and maybe that's what you're going to have to live with if you feel like you have to have an answer. It was just randomly picked because he randomly wanted to commit a random act of violence and see if he can get away with it. That would be the best motive that you can have. Again, I feel like the answer is more convoluted. My personal gut feeling tells me, and some of you aren't going to like what I'm about to say, my personal gut feeling tells me that Bryan Kohberger was actually involved in this, but the reason why the house was picked because he had an accomplice, and that accomplice wanted that house in particular. For Bryan Kohberger, it may have been who never mind kind of thing. He might have been involved, and it didn't really matter. It was somebody else that picked the house. That's my gut feeling, but I can't prove it. And I think that Bryan Kohberger, and again, I wasn't going to put this in the video. I think I'm going to add it at the end. There was a mysterious call, we know, between Bryan Kohberger back to his house an hour or so after the murders happened that lasted for about an hour. I originally believed that happened with his father. It turns out from other information we're hearing that maybe that was a call that with his mother where he spent about an hour. Is it plausible? Is it plausible that Bryan Kohberger got himself caught up in something, called his parents after the murders and said, I'm in a fucking thing, something. I've gotten myself involved in something. It's a mess, blah, blah, blah. Or could it have even been an admission of guilt? And did that factor into his plea deal? Did law enforcement find out that possibly his parents could have been covering for him, that maybe he admitted to them on a phone call, which they don't have a recording, they can't prove, but is that a possible thing that happened, that Brian Kohberger called his parents afterwards and said, I did something? Either he admitted to doing it or he admitted to being caught up in something and he was going to be in trouble. Did that happen? Did law enforcement lean on the parents and threaten them with going to jail for being an accessory after the fact, for knowing about it and helping cover it up for their son? Did that happen? There's no way to prove that. And by the way, I want to make it clear, unfortunately, I wasn't going to add that to this video, but I decided I don't want to make a video just on that issue. So I thought I'd add it in here. That is not part of this documentary. They don't talk about that phone call at all. So please understand, I try to detach your mind, even though I'm trying to tell you what happened in this documentary for your informing you. The conversation about the phone call to his mother that morning is not in there. What is in there is all the talk about his phone pinging a cell tower that is within range of the house and how that seems to be very damning evidence. I'm not even going to go into that. It's aggravating, this shit. Those were word games and manipulation games. Even Bill Thompson on the stand during that guilt plea said, we can't place Brian Kohberger at the house. We can only place his phone near the house. They cannot place him at the house. But again, in this episode, it's going to be the retelling of the story over and over again, so that the narrative becomes they always had him from dead to rights from the very beginning. So sorry it took me 12 minutes to tell you that you are wasting your time watching this documentary, regardless of which side you fit in this equation. Whether you believe that Brian Kohberger didn't do it, whether you believe Brian Kohberger did it but maybe with someone else, or whether you believe Brian Kohberger did it and the simple answer is he did it alone. Regardless of how you feel, this episode will change nothing for you. It does nothing. It adds nothing to the equation, with the possible caveat exception of if you're looking for something to wrap your head around, the psychological profile that they build of a man who's disturbed and doesn't feel anything and has no emotions and is maybe a psychopath and all these things. Maybe you can feel a little bit better the way they laid out the psychological makeup. So again, I want to say thank you all for watching the channel. The channel's not done. Clearly, the channel's not done. Brian Kohberger's story is not done. I'm still trying to debate. Everybody keeps asking me to read the James Patterson book. I bought the James Patterson book. It hasn't been released yet. The documentary coming out on Prime hasn't come out yet. And all I can say about that is it's extremely difficult. At this point, think about it. From my perspective, there's nothing to gain from that other than maybe something that somebody's going to, a bombshell. Maybe if Patterson's book has a piece of information we've never seen before that they leaked out there, maybe that'll help. But just repeating the same shit over again, we are never going to have a trial. We're never going to have a trial. And because we're never going to have a trial, what's the point of reading all the details and making notes and go, okay, let's see if that comes true into trial? There will be no trial. So at the end of the day, I want to do the book series for you on James Patterson's book. I want to do the book review or the documentary review on the Prime, but it's extremely difficult for me to do so because we're not learning anything new, and all we will have is unanswered questions. And the repeating of the narrative over and over again is just going to become part of the lore that goes from here, and everyone will believe that it was always a certain way from day one when it wasn't, and we all know it wasn't. So sorry guys, not the best video. I should probably caveat this in the title. This one sucks. Talk to you later. Bye.